thanks very much. It's it's always weird hearing somebody talk about you that way because you never feel as important as somebody tells you are. Just get this up for you quickly and tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I'm sorry, I should have done this beforehand. Okay, so as John mentioned, I'm part of the MSL group now. It's a really large organization. We have about 3,000 employees globally, focusing on public relations, but as I'm sure you guys talk about a lot right now, it's really trying to determine what that means in the next 5 to 10 years. You know, public relations, advertising, it's all kind of blurring. Social media is at the front end of that spear when it comes to blurring all of that, and everybody's scrambling to figure out what's going to be. So my role is interesting because within Publicis, and when I was at Ogilvy, it was the same thing. I worked across the network, so I worked with advertising, I worked with media buying, I worked with public relations people, and not being a PR person by trade myself, it was really fascinating for me to see how social media, in my opinion, fits in really, really well with PR when it comes to earned media and understanding digital word of mouth and how you look at share of voice and work with influencers. And my colleagues on the advertising side of the table, they're using social media in a completely different way, and it's all coming together. So, you know, you get all these people saying PR is going to go away or advertising is going to go away, and it's not. We're just trying to figure out what that next thing is. And I think being in part of social media, it puts you at the center of that circle, and it really just makes it that much more exciting. So I'm happy to be here today. I'm glad that my friends from Pierpont brought me down. It was nice of them to think of me. Pierpont's great because, as you can see, I did a lot of work with BP, and we'll get into that in a minute. The oil and gas industry is really fascinating to me, and it's a great, I know many of you may not agree with that, but it's really it's a great industry to work with, and it's fun to have colleagues again who are in that area. So I thank the guys from Pierpont for bringing me down. So let me tell you a little bit about this, and I want this to be totally interactive. So ask questions throughout. You don't have to wait till the end, or if you want to, however you want to work it out. But what I want to talk about today is what we did at BP for two reasons. One, it was a great case study in crisis communications and how you handle a crisis that, quite frankly, doesn't go away for 98 days. It was like Groundhog Day. But two, from my point of view, I had spent 5 years prior to the crisis working within agencies, trying to explain to our clients how social media should really be an integrated part of the communication strategy that any large company has. And it was always, you know, these were the early days of social media, and they were always very polite, and they would listen to you and they'd talk to you, and then they'd give you a pat on the head and tell you to go away and, you know, just go ahead and work on Facebook and Twitter and do whatever it is you guys do. But BP actually brought it together because they had to in the middle of a crisis. So not only was it a great crisis case study, but it also talks about how you can operationalize social media within a large Marcom effort within a global 50 company, and just how all that works together. So the presentation is built around BP, but we're going to talk about crisis management, issues management, and reputation management, all as it kind of interweaves throughout this. So if I go in a lot of different directions, bear with me. So let me give you a little background first before we get into this so you understand where we're at. It's ironically 2 years ago tomorrow, April 20th, that the Deepwater Horizon exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. About 3 days later, 11 people unfortunately died that day on April 20th. 3 days later, the Deepwater Horizon sank, and when it sank, that's when the riser pipe broke. So what was connecting it to the Deepwater Horizon sheared in half, and the blowout preventer at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico didn't work. So obviously the oil, as you all know, began spilling into the Gulf completely unabated. BP had been a client of mine for years, for 5 years, the entire time I'd been with my agency. And, you know, at least once or twice a year, they would bring me into the room and talk about social media. You know, I'd be with the advertising guys and who were doing all the Beyond Petroleum, the great advertising work you see there. And they would bring me in, we talk about strategies and what we could do. And as I'm sure you can imagine, being a big, you know, British company, very, very conservative company in a very conservative industry, they were just like, thanks for coming, that's great. Don't want to have anything to do with social media. We don't talk to people, we just do what we do. So it was April 20th when the accident happened, and they did nothing. You know, BP did absolutely nothing with their communications. If you remember, there was no real effort to communicate to the American people, to the key stakeholders. They just really kind of sat on their hands. And for weeks, I kept calling, you know, the guys in New York saying, do they need help with crisis communications, anything we can do? And the answer was no, no, no. So I live and work in DC, but I'm in New York all the time. So I happened to be in our New York office, and my boss called me up and said, you know, there's a big presentation going on today with BP. This is mid-May, and they want to hear about social media and what social media might be able to do in the crisis. And I was like, all right. So I put together a quick proposal, statement of work, went up to the 7th floor of our building, and I didn't realize what I was walking into. It was our CEO, our global CEO, our North American CEO, some of the lead strategists on BP. So I was clearly like 5 levels above my pay grade. I was the most junior person in the room. On the phone, the other end of the conference call was Tony Hayward, Bob Dudley, Lamar Alexander, all the head honchos over at BP. And everybody's going through all of their proposals on what they needed to be doing with the crisis advertising, with crisis communications, what's going on. And there's heated debate back and forth. And then it got to my part, and I spoke for about 10 or 15 minutes, giving them suggestions on what we needed to do, because BP had absolutely no presence whatsoever in social media. They'd been putting us off for years. And as I expected, there were, you know, I did my piece, and there were crickets chirping on the other end of the conference call. And I got nothing, and they said, thank you very much. And I went on my way. It was a Friday afternoon. I'm like, this is great. It's Friday. It's May. I'm going home. I'm going to hang out for the weekend. Excuse me. By the time I landed in DC, my boss is calling me. He said, they need you down in Houston. I'm like, who needs me in Houston and why? He's like, well, the BP guys, they actually want to, you know, take you up on your proposal. They want to start working in social media. I was like, okay. So I had to go down on Saturday, and I was, you know, packing up, and I told my wife I'll be gone for, you know, probably about a week, because I figured this is BP. They're not going to do anything. And then for the next 6 months, I only made it home 8 times. I ended up living in Houston and living in the conference center there in the building, and in a hotel, and doing this crisis communication. So that's how that all came about. And then we move into what we did. So we were responsible for all the social media strategy and activity for the Gulf of Mexico response for BP, reporting directly to Luc Bardin. He's the chief marketing officer of BP. The reason I put that in as one of the key assignments is because, as somebody in social media, having worked with working in a PR agency, I never dealt with a chief marketing officer before. It had always been the holy grail, sort of who we wanted to work with, who we wanted to be engaging with, but we always ended up with the public relations people, the public affairs people, corporate comms people, investor relations. So that's the natural course of things. That's where we belonged in that order. But because of the severity of what was going on, we had to work with Luc. And it was a really fascinating opportunity for me, because it was the first time we used social media as not only an engagement channel, but as a marketing channel as well. And the expertise he brought to the table, he taught me a lot about, you know, content development and engaging content, and how you can build a really larger communication strategy that starts in social media but affects everything else. And I say affects everything else because we became the focal point of what you saw. So, you know, at the time I worked for Ogilvy Public Relations. Ogilvy and Mather was our big advertising agency. Ogilvy Public Relations and Ogilvy Mather were not a part of the crisis response. It was just my team, the digital influence team. So we were working with a new advertising agency, a new PR agency. We were working with the press officers and the corporate comms people of BP. And we were putting out ads. If you guys remember those ads that came out, where it would be Iris in the Gulf of Mexico, and she'd be talking about how she grew up there and she wasn't going to go away. The way we were working with the strategy on that was we would cut the ads one day. We would edit them overnight. We'd air them on Tuesday, let's say, and then we'd look at social media to see what the response was to the ads. And based upon the feedback we were getting at social media, the advertising agency would then go back and recut the ads to fix the message to make it resonate more with what the constituents wanted. So Luc wanted to use social media as a way to basically be a living focus group for the larger marketing effort and the larger response effort. So that was the first key strategy. The second key strategy was when we were sitting down, if you take a look, it says we manage, maintain, and develop content for the Facebook page, Twitter account, YouTube, and Flickr. First off, that's all we could manage, considering the size of the account, the size of the crisis. That's the only properties we were going to deal with. Everything else we just completely forgot about. What we did with the Facebook and social media strategy was we used Facebook as the only place where, if you were an affected individual from the spill, where you could reach out and engage with BP. There was an 800 number you could call where you'd get a press officer. It was the same 800 number that every reporter from the New York Times or Washington Post had as well. But if you really wanted to talk to BP, you really wanted to engage with BP, Facebook was the only place you were going to do it. So when we first got down, they were very, very nervous. When we said, let's set up the Facebook page, they wanted nothing to do with the fact that we were going to allow commenting. And I said, there's no reason to go on Facebook if we're not going to allow people to comment on the things we post. So one of the things that we did was we worked very closely with their attorneys, and we came up with very, very strict guidelines, community guidelines on what you could and could not do on the page. And if you violated the terms of the community agreement, we were going to remove you, period, end of story, no ifs, ands, or buts. And when you're going into an issue or a crisis, or you're just setting up a social media property with any of your clients when you begin to work with them, that's the key element of this. You have to remember, people are very nervous about hearing from their constituencies or their consumers, even to this day. The thing is that this is your house, this is your party, you can make up the rules, and if people don't abide by the rules, you ask them to leave your party. That's the way it works. So just in day-to-day, let alone a crisis, that's how you want to do it. The thing that was fascinating during the crisis that we noticed is that when we first got there, as I'm sure you can well imagine, everybody just hated us, right? They just wanted to rail and vent and scream at us, and we did. We let them do that. If they used profanity, if they were threatening, if they did things that were against community guidelines, we removed them. But it was about 2 weeks of that, and then it finally mellowed out. It became interesting that the people who were there every day, and we had a lot of people who were there every day, they started policing the community. They were the ones who were, if somebody came in and started getting a little bit out of line or a little bit angry, they were the ones who would start to say, no, that's not what this is about. We're trying to communicate with BP. We're trying to help the fishermen who are affected on the Gulf Coast. We're trying to help the hotel owner in Destin, Florida, whose business is shot for the summer because of this. That's what this is all about. So stop screwing around, essentially, and leave us alone. And the community really handled that well. It was interesting to see. The Twitter account was really only for headline generation. I mean, I know there's always a lot of people ask me all the time, what do you do with Twitter? To me, Twitter's about generating headlines and driving traffic back to your Facebook or your website property, whatever you want to do. So that's exactly what we did with Twitter. We use that as a way to get the headlines out, and we'll talk about the significance about that in a second. The YouTube page and the Flickr account, we did all of these, and BP really didn't understand why we needed YouTube and why we needed Flickr. And the multimedia assets for me are a big part of social media. They're properly tagged, they can be shared, they can be, repurposed on other sites. People can embed the YouTube video. So what that does for me, and it was a big problem during the crisis, but it's an issue that we deal with all the time with our clients, is social media at the end of the day, if you have a wide variety of these properties all interacting together and people are sharing and commenting, it increases your search engine optimization. And that's what that's really all about. I mean, social media is sort of the support of the holy grail, which is SEO. And I get clients asking me all the time, can I get better search engine results? Can I just pay for it? And I was like, well, there's a big difference between SEM and SEO, and the only way to get really good SEO is to have a really good social media strategy. So that's where those other properties come into play. Provided the strategic counsel of the corporate comms team, managing BP.com. This was interesting too, because never before had social media been the one leading the charge on all of the digital properties. So the corporate communications team at BP.com is this huge, massive team of people who deal with all of the internal employee communications as well as everything you see on their official website. That actually got rolled up under us in many respects because we were telling these guys what they needed to be doing on the BP.com property. So you start to see how, when I got there, you had all these disparate groups of people kind of staring at each other around a conference table. You had the advertising people, and this is just internal at BP. We're not talking about any of the agencies. You had the marketing people, the advertising people, the public affairs people, the corporate comms people, the IR people. Everybody's looking at each other, no one's working together, and all of a sudden through social media, we became the glue that brought everybody together because everybody needed a piece of us, but they didn't necessarily need a piece of everything else. So we started developing key strategies and populating that out, and that's how that all worked together. And then finally with public affairs, developed and managed the inside the beltway strategy. And a lot of people always forget about how social media can be effective in public affairs, but it really is, inside the beltway where I live. You take a look at, senators or Congress people who are doing, position papers on things. They're not the ones doing the research. They're not the ones writing the papers. It's their 20-something Hill staffers that are doing it. And as you guys know, because you're that age group, you live in social media, you live on Google, you do that kind of research. And if we're there and we're providing content in the channels and the avenues where these researchers are looking, we're going to get our clients' position across. So public affairs and social media is really very important. So in terms of staffing, we had 57 people working in the agency on 4-hour shifts, going 24/7 monitoring, conversation monitoring on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We had to keep that going literally 24/7. And if you think about how you would operationalize that, and again, this is a crisis of crazy magnitude, but essentially we'd start the day in Houston with the team there. And then after 4 hours, we transition to San Francisco, and then we transition to Australia, and then we transition to India, and then we transition to the UK, and then we transition back to New York and Houston. And that's how we did it, 4-hour shifts, one person on each one of those properties. And normally you wouldn't need that. Normally you don't need that level of moderation and monitoring, but because of the level of this crisis, that's exactly what we needed to do. We had a 22-person content creation team working on developing these stories, and we were doing 20 to 24 stories a day, which in social media is just ridiculous. It's way too much. You never want to have that much content going out at all. You want to limit it, but because of what we were doing and the magnitude of what was going on, we had to make sure that we were keeping people informed, so we did that. The piece that was interesting was, we had the updates for social media for breaking news, right? And this was a really interesting point in how social media can change the way a company interacts with the press and interacts with the rest of the globe. There was a point in time during the spill where BP had stopped, I believe it was Top Kill, one of the operations where they were trying to plug it up, one of what turned out to be failed attempts. And they had stopped working for about 19 hours. They stopped the operation. And at one point in time during those 19 hours, Admiral Thad Allen, who was the Obama administration spokesperson throughout this whole crisis, was on the news saying that everything was going great. And when the Obama administration found out that BP had stopped the operation, they were furious. They were livid. So at that point in time, they essentially took away BP's ability to break news, to control the news of the story. From this point forward, all the news had to be broken by Admiral Allen and his team at the Coast Guard. And as you can imagine, this infuriated BP in the sense that this is their story. They were doing the entire operation, but the way it was being presented to the world was that this Coast Guard Admiral and the Obama administration was actually doing all this. So every morning, we would have to brief Admiral Allen on what the operation was going to be that day, and then he would go and do his press conference, and he would break the news. And it was about a week of this when all of a sudden it became obvious to us when we were sitting in these briefings that we knew exactly what it was going to be saying. We knew exactly what the briefing was going to be because we were briefing him. So I would send my team down with prepared tweets ready to go. And as soon as Admiral Allen said it in the microphone, it was broken. And we would tweet about it instantly. We would just get it out and start driving traffic to all the BP properties. And the only other people at the press conferences were reporters. So this story wasn't going to come out for at least another 15 minutes, if not an hour, whenever it was. So even though we weren't officially allowed to break the story anymore because of Twitter and the speed of Twitter and the speed of Facebook, and we had the prepared content ready to go, we were still able to sort of trump the administration and be the ones breaking the news. And that changed the entire dynamic for us as we were moving forward through the rest of the crisis. We had a staff of 4 constantly on location in Houston. That's where I was. I mean, we were there 7 days a week. When you're dealing with issues in crisis management, to this day I make this recommendation. I've been making it all along to my clients because I've done a lot of crisis work in the past. You need to have a war room, right? You need to have a place where everybody comes together, where everybody can deal with the crisis and communicate with each other. In many cases, it just needs to be a virtual war room. It can be a space on Basecamp or some sort of a shared platform where all the assets are, where everybody knows everybody's phone number and can get in touch with everybody. In this case, it was an actual war room where we were all together, the advertising agency, the press officers. I have a picture of it later on I can show you. But what that's evolved into now, and what I'm working with my clients at MSL on a regular basis, is creating the sort of rapid response team within your company that's made up of a representative from the social media team, from the PR team, and maybe that person's the same, or the advertising people. But the point is that clients now need to have a team of people that are dedicated across the agency model. That's a rapid response team, and it doesn't necessarily need to be because of a crisis. But one of my clients right now is Sprint, and all of the issues they deal with all the time with regulation, legislation, or if people are complaining about service, and it takes them forever to respond. So if they have this war room or this rapid response team that's ready to go at all times, it just allows you to respond to your consumers in a way that they expect now. And you see people doing this really well, like Comcast with some of the service they do, or Delta Airlines with the service on Twitter they do. So when you're thinking with your clients, you're beginning to determine how you want to build this out internally. Think of small war room teams that run across all the communications discipline and can really respond to any issue, no matter how big or small, in real time, because that's what everybody expects from you now. And you can just see at the bottom all of the agencies that were involved across the network. So one of the biggest, these are a couple of the defining achievements and why they were relevant. When Tony Hayward made that horrible comment, "I want my life back," that was when Facebook actually became very credible for the first time with BP, and it was a crazy time and a crazy situation, and I was just joking around with the guys who set me up with the microphone here for the camera. I ran into the men's room to tuck my shirt in, and I hit mute because I didn't want anybody to be able to hear what was going on in the men's room. And people forget that all the time, and if you're working with your clients and they're mic'd up, you got to make sure that you shut that thing down, because what happened here was Tony gave a press conference. We were at a shipyard, a staging area in Houma, Louisiana. And he gave a press conference, and at this point in time, the guy was sleeping maybe 3 hours a day. Everyone was just on razor's edge. And he gave a press conference, and he hopped off the podium, and we're all walking back to the van to go back to the airport to get out of there. And he had left his lavalier on, and it was still mic'd up. And one of the reporters who we knew just very innocently asked him, "Are you doing okay? You look really tired." And he just responded, "Yeah, I just want my life back." And mic was on, camera was still on, and boom, that became sort of the rallying cry of people who just hated BP. So as soon as we saw that happen, we realized we were going to have a major problem. So when we're in the van heading back to the airport, I called the rest of the team in Houston, and Tony got on the phone and dictated to them his apology, what he really meant. And we had that ready to go just in case it did become an issue. And by the time we landed back in Houston, it had become an issue. And the team had put his apology up there. And you can still see it to this day if you take the time to do the research on the Facebook page. And it was a sincere apology saying that's not what I meant at all. And he explained the premise of why he said it. And at first the outrage was just insane, as you can imagine. It was just vitriol everywhere. And then within 20 minutes, a half hour of Tony's comment going up, you could see the conversation again begin to shift a little bit, and people, no one felt bad for the guy, no one was going to give him sympathy, but you could see a level of empathy begin to come out, and people saying, all right, well, this guy is under a lot of pressure, it was a mistake, get off his back. And the executives, Tony himself at BP, all of a sudden realized, he's like, these are the guys who when I got down there, they were mocking me for suggesting we do a Facebook page and YouTube, literally, even though they flew me down there. And all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, they're like, wow, this thing is really allowing us to affect the conversation that's going on. So you could see how this company was beginning to shift. We had, 24/7 monitoring of the conversation allowed us to see things that other people couldn't see. And one of them was when there were a lot of conspiracy theories that were beginning to crop up that BP wasn't doing anything. We had, everyone was accusing us of just sitting on our hands, not doing anything when these guys are working around the clock to figure out what to do. One of the conspiracy theories that came up was, if you remember any of the images, one of the easiest ways to get rid of the oil on the surface of the Gulf was to literally corral it in booms, in these huge quarter-mile diameter wide booms. and the Coast Guard would set it on fire, and they'd literally burn off the oil. And bloggers and people on Facebook all of a sudden came up with this idea that there were turtles and marine life and dolphins that were being burned alive in the in situ burns, and it just wasn't true. I mean, it was a Coast Guard operation, number one. It wasn't a BP operation, but everything was BP's fault at this point in time. So when you're dealing with a crisis, you got to realize that no matter how much it's not your problem, everything's your problem. So BP has to respond to this, and we had videos, we had pictures of the Coast Guard operation. We would show them having people go underneath in scuba gear, go underneath the oil to make sure that no one was stuck in it, that things were cleared before they set the burn up. So once we were able to see those trends and we were able to get out there with real pictures and real video and real testimony from the Coast Guard people, again, the conversation began to dip down and we could handle that. And then finally, we did some live tweeting and congressional hearings of Tony with Lamar and Daryl. And this was interesting because no one really cares about what goes on C-SPAN, yet this was really important national news. The fact that we were tweeting what was happening allowed us to keep the conversation going on, even though no one's paying attention to it. So you guys must deal with this a lot when you're thinking about social media. It's content. How do we continually come up with engaging content? And one of the things that we did with this assignment was we finally came up with this roving reporter who would do nothing but go around all the operations in New Orleans, all the operations in Houston, coming up with content. So you had two types of content going on the channel, right? And you were making sure that everybody was engaged. One was the content just telling BP's story. The other is the content about what we're doing to help people and how we can continue to help people. So you have the customer service angle, as well as you have just everybody trying, BP trying to demonstrate to everybody that we're working hard to fix this. And the strategy about this is, and we present this to our clients all the time, because everybody says, look, I'm on Facebook. I've got this one brand voice and everybody expects me to be this brand. How do I handle this? And you don't need to look at it that way. It's not like advertising where there's just one voice all the time. So your Facebook page or your Google Plus page, however you want to look at it, it's sort of like your broadcast network, okay? Everybody understands NBC, right, or ABC. You know what that brand stands for. But then you also know that on NBC, Monday night's going to be murder mystery night, and Tuesday night's crime scene investigation night, and Thursday night's comedy night, and Friday night's family programming night. So people come and go from that network, but they come and go for the content that they're relevant in, but the brand, the overall brand, is still relevant to everybody. And that's how you have to look at these social media properties. It's like a broadcast channel. You can't have content that's going to resonate with everybody. You just can't. If you can, I'll hire you tomorrow. So you have to look at it that way. How is my programming content going to reach my different consumer base, knowing that they all know who I am, knowing that they all know I'm BP, or and some of my other clients like Tide or Swiffer, they all know what that stands for, but I'm only going to engage on Mondays and Wednesdays because that's when it's relevant to me. So that's a content strategy that you have to look at, but it's that original content generation that's most important. And then finally, per Doug Suttles, who was the chief operating officer of the whole shebang at the time, we had to create a dashboard. One of the things that, again, people were accusing us of not doing anything. And they had all of these ROVs, these robots underneath the water fixing these things, trying to fix it. And they had 14 or 16 robots, which means you had 32 cameras, because for each robot that was actually working on the well, there was a sister robot that was the eyes of it, the camera, so the operator could get depth perception and see what he was doing or she was doing. So we had all these live feeds, and our roving reporter, and the bullet point up above, she was the one who came up with the idea. She was like, we've got these feeds here, they're running 24/7, you can see everything that's going on. Why don't we just put those on the Facebook page? So our programmer just came up with this cool little app, this cool little widget, and we threw it up on the Facebook page, and it became the most viewed piece of content we had pretty much throughout the entire thing. And it was just because people wanted to sit there and see that BP was actually trying to do something. And they had no problem with the fact that, half the time, most of the cameras were down, the other half of them were working. But it took away this whole conspiracy theory that BP wasn't doing anything and not working on it. So again, just trying to figure out how technology and social media can help you fix these things and get inside behind the walls of your client's organization can always help. So this next piece I'm going to show you, this was really kind of, if you could think of a Hollywood moment, this was actually almost stupid. But we had just plugged the well for the first time, as you'll see in a second. It was the first time that no oil had been flowing into the Gulf of Mexico for like 98 or 99 days. And when we're in this war room, it was this huge conference room we had on the 11th floor of this skyscraper in Houston. We had a wall set of TVs where we had all the news programs going on so we could see everything that was happening. And Bob Dudley, who's now, Tony's out, Bob Dudley's now the CEO, he comes in because that's where we did all the press briefings, it's where the press officers was, and because it was such a big piece of news, he came in to watch it live. And we're sitting there watching CNN, and I used to love CNN, but CNN gets everything wrong after going through the BP crisis. They just make up stories, I'm telling you. So I can't watch CNN anymore. But we're sitting there watching CNN, and don't you know, they're getting the story wrong. And the story is that with the ROV feeds that are looking at the well, there are all these gauges on that blowout preventer, and those gauges meant nothing to what the operation was, because what the engineers were afraid of when they plugged up the well, they were afraid that if there was too much pressure in the riser pipe that they just attached, that it might back up into the well and the well might blow out on the seabed somewhere else, and then you've got a disaster that no one can fix, right? It's just, then your game's over. You're just gonna wait till the well's all in the Gulf. So they're super stressed out about it, but the device measuring the pressure in the well was inside the riser pipe. So anything you could see on TV was just irrelevant, right? And that was part of the press release. That went out 1 million times to everybody. And CNN's getting it wrong, and the press officer picks up the phone and is screaming at the producer of Rick Sanchez's show live while he's on TV, screaming at him that he's getting the story wrong. And I just happened to be sitting at the desk next to him, and I said, just tell him to read the tweet that I just sent out. And that's what Toby said, and then this is what happened. Sorry. Here, let me jump out for a second, I'll show it to you. Sorry about that. When I was in London last week, I had my my laptop stolen, so this is a loaner, and I'm not used to working on this one. All right, so this is what happened.
These gauges are more to do with the accumulators that are used to build up hydraulic pressure for some of the valves than it is for the actual internal pressure. Although the gauge that you're looking at is interesting.
Well, hold on. It looks like BP's watching our newscast. They're trying to answer our questions. Ready? Here you go. What's this tweet we just got over? This is amazing, by the way. Look at this. The gauges you see on the ROVs are not for pressure in the well.
Exactly.
No gauges to observe as we use transducers to monitor well pressure. This comes over from Kent Wells. We thank Mr. Wells for sending us that information. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Yes, absolutely. The monitors.
So you can see, sorry.
Are actually.
You can see that it was just a ridiculous moment. Now I got to figure out how to get this to stop. Just a ridiculous moment in how Twitter can change the story. But I mean, even for everybody that was on my team at that moment, it all of a sudden dawned on us that, this silly little headline generating tool just changed the story live. Now, I mean, again, that was like a Hollywood moment. You couldn't have made that up if you wanted to, but it was amazing to see that happen. And that's when the guys at BP just, they've completely now redone their comm strategy based upon everything that was going on in the Gulf of Mexico. So they no longer have silos. And I see a lot of my clients doing this now too, but they no longer have siloed groups. When I got down there into Houston, The chief marketing officer, Luke, reported to the CEO. And then when I got down, and you had Duncan, who was in charge of corporate comms, he reported to the CEO. And that's why you had that entire month of people staring at each other, not knowing what to do. Because the corporate comms guys, people were trying to dodge the bullet and say, it's not my responsibility. And the marketing guys were trying to say the same thing, who's going to do all this? So they've changed it now, and they've changed it into what, you know, I think MSL Group is trying to turn into, and I know my old agency is trying to turn into, which is this integrated marketing communications firm. They hired a guy named Pete Henshaw, and he's the chief, and I'm going to get the title wrong, but you'll get the idea. He's the chief integrated marketing officer globally for BP. So regardless of what type of communications it is, whether it's investor relations, public affairs, corporate comms, advertising, it all rolls up to one guy, and he tells everybody how to play nice together. He tells everybody how to work together, and that's a completely different model, and I think you're going to see a lot of that changing over the next couple of years, and I truly believe it's because of social media, but it's because I'm in social media. So just showing you the images and why I'm showing them to you, you know, this is the first time, and again, this is 2 years old now, so it's a little bit dated, but at the time, you know, this is when my point of view changed and my recommendations to my client changed. The Facebook page became the central destination for everything that was going on during the crisis. And now when I'm working with clients, you know, I'm starting to tell them to forget about their website. You know, the website is nothing anymore, and it's not going to go away. It's not going to die. You're going to need a branded website out there. But quite honestly, at the end of the day, what's the point? You can't engage with your consumers there. You know, it's still just a push. You might have comments, maybe there's some e-commerce, you'll have that. But with everything changing now and all of your consumers, or most of your consumers, being in Facebook and social media, why would you send them somewhere else? Why wouldn't you go where they already are? So, you know, the evolution of the crisis allowed me to see that, because there was a tab on the BP.com site that I was responsible for that was all about the crisis. And if you go to the BP.com site now, you still see it. It says Gulf of Mexico restoration. But no one went there. You know, no one went to the .com. No one cared. Everybody was coming to the Facebook page and see what was going on there. So, you know, if you're moving into client recommendations now, start to think about that the Facebook page is the central hub for most brands and the main place they should be. The Twitter page, again, you know, it's a headline generator. It's a great way to drive traffic to the places you want them to go, be it your website or be it your Facebook page. It allows you to respond quickly. It's a little bit of boiling the ocean, so you can't obviously respond to everybody. But, and I don't think it happens much anymore, and I think it may have been because of BP. But when I got down to Houston, because BP had not done anything with social media, they didn't have a Twitter handle. So some guy in California came up with this great handle. It was actually very funny. BP Global PR, which was a complete parody on what was going on. It was the BP logo, but it was in black with oil dripping off of it. And because it was such a great handle, everyone thought it was legit. I mean, people were going there to see what, you know, if you did a search on BP and that was the first thing that came up. So when I got down there, he already had literally like 50,000 followers, and we didn't even have a handle yet. So BP wanted to shut that down. And when you're in issues or crisis, that's one thing you don't want to do in social media. You don't want to mess with people. We advised them not to go after this guy, not to shut it down. I mean, some of the stuff was pretty harsh, but it was actually pretty funny. So when BP finally calmed down and they said, okay, we can't shut it down, is there anything we can do? And again, when dealing with issues or crisis, keep this in the back of your head. The best thing you can always do is make sure that whoever your enemies are or your detractors are on social media, the channels they're using, because they're going to use the same channels you're using, make sure they're following the terms of service, right? So we did a little research on this guy, and the one thing we were able to get him on was that he wasn't following Twitter's terms of service, which says if you are a parody site, you have to clearly indicate that, right? So we called up Twitter. We said, you know, we're fine with the handle. There's nothing we're going to do about that. But the guy's not telling anybody he's a parody site. We're trying to get people to come to our Twitter handle to get real information, important information, relevant information. You guys got to come down on them. And they did. They came down on him pretty hard, and they made him admit that he was a parody, and he was really pissed about that. He came after us for about a week with that. But, you know, I understand that you're going to have detractors, but when you're trying to get people really important information during a crisis, you've got to make sure that people can find you, and that's one way to do it. Don't shut anybody down, but just make sure that everybody's playing by the same rules and following the rule book. And if that's the case, then it's up to you and your comm strategy to make it successful. So the YouTube channel was really a big surprise to me. I mean, it was the first part of my recommendation. And as I told you before, I had 4 properties we were going to go on. And the YouTube channel actually became the place where we had the deepest level of engagement. And you know, we started putting up videos of the operation, of everything that was going on, and trying to show people what was happening. But the guy you see in the corner there, in the center there, his name is Kent Wells, and he was actually the guy on that tweet that I wrote. He was the chief engineer of the entire operation. So anything that was going on in the Gulf of Mexico, he was responsible for. And every morning, he would do press briefings, mostly on conference call, but sometimes he would do them on a video conference with reporters. Those briefings were anywhere from, you know, 15 minutes to 45 minutes, depending upon the day's operations. And, you know, reporters, they're going to use maybe 2 quotes out of that 45-minute thing, and they're going to write the story the way they want. So we would sit with Kent and watch these every morning, and then one of the women on my team at dawned on her, she was going, why don't we just start, you know, Kent was great. I mean, Kent's one of those guys who's just, he's a natural, he's, you know, 6'4", he's a good-looking guy, just very comfortable in his skin. We started filming him and putting him up on YouTube. We figured, you know, he's doing it anyway, what's it going to hurt us? We'll just put a camera up there and mic him up, and he can do it. People would watch every day the entire video. And you know YouTube, you go 1 minute and 15 seconds and people are out, right? We would have 80% of the people coming in and watching the entire 42-minute press briefing that he was doing, because it was such detailed information that you couldn't get anywhere else. And it was really, you know, I was a bit of a geek with it. It was really cool information. And a lot of people felt the same way. So this thing that was, you know, almost a throwaway so that we could really improve SEO through having people embed video became the place where we had the deepest level of engagement. And when you're talking about that type of engagement where you're getting your client's detailed story out there, you can't pay enough for that. You can't, you know, there's nothing advertising can do to get you that level of intimacy with your client. So, you know, always consider the fact that you have to be in as many properties as possible because of SEO, but you really never know what's going to make people tick. And once you find out what makes them tick, you've got to leverage that and move quickly to bank on that. This is just a chart to show you where we were when we started out. And yeah, the dates are right. Sometimes the dates are wrong. They're right on here. You can see the amount of followers we got. And again, YouTube became our biggest track. And this ends at a certain point in time. I don't know where the audience ended up, but you can see where we started out and what we had to do. And the reason I show this is because when you're going into clients, and you still have a lot of them out there. You know, consumer package companies are one thing, but there are a lot of B2B clients and conservative clients out there that aren't involved in social media. My biggest point to them is you've got to be in social media if for no other reason that you have all your employees following you, friending you on Facebook, on Twitter, wherever you want to be. And the reason why is if, you know, when I got down to Houston, we had nobody, right? Nobody was following, because we didn't have a page. Nobody was following BP on Facebook. If we just had a Facebook page that had, you know, 40,000 of the 80,000 employees that BP has globally, I would have had a built-in fan base of 40,000 people that I could have reached out to, that they could have then taken that message to and shared it with their friends and family, and that share of voice and that word of mouth would have gone out. So it's a key strategic communications tool if and when you have an issue or a crisis. I mean, you know, maybe nobody does want to follow BP, but when that crisis hit, I would have been so much ahead of the game. Instead of building up to 40,000 over the course of 6 months, I would have been building from 40,000 up. So always advise your clients to have it for that reason, if for no other reason, if they're afraid of having social media. The Flickr, you know, the Flickr really was a bit of a throwaway. A lot of reporters ended up using all the pictures we use. So it was great with that because they were embedding it on their blogs that they were writing on the New York Times or those places. So the assets were being shared, the tag content was being shared, the SEO strategy was really working. But it did cause us a bit of problems, and it was, again, another issue we had to deal with because, you know, in social media, everything's all about transparency, and you never think that anybody's going to catch you. Well, there was this point in time where, if you look at this is the ROV feeds, the live ROV feeds that we put up on the Facebook page. So imagine in a war room, a control command center that BP has, all of those feeds are on a big screen. It looks like something out of NASA. And all the ROV, the robot operators, are in that room. That's where they work. And they were working in Houston. They weren't on the ships in the Gulf of Mexico. So this BP photographer goes in and he takes a couple pictures. He's going to post them up on Flickr. And you know, he takes a look at one of the pictures he's putting up and he notices that a couple of the screens are dead. And he's like, well, I don't want anybody to think that, you know, we're not using all of our technology. So he photoshops in some old images on the dead screens and posts it up on Flickr. You know, and you never think it's going to happen, but some psycho blogger somewhere in England at 2 in the morning, and they're calling me in my hotel room, he's you know, blogging and screaming about the fact that BP actually is, you know, changing the story and photoshopping in images and how he figured it out, why he was looking at the timestamps, but he was, and we had this little mini crisis going on. So we had to abate the whole situation. We took the images down, we went on Facebook, we posted an apology, we talked about why it happened, you know, the guy posted his own statement, and before the press woke up in North America, the story had died, you know, so it's just one of those things where one, don't ever mess with anything you're putting up on social media because someone's going to find it, and number two, if you are monitoring and you're paying attention, you can usually, in many cases, kill a story before it becomes much of an issue. This is just to show you the feeds that we put on. This is actually on the BP.com site. This was a big moment for us too, and BP, I think BP still does a lot of these to this day. This was the first time, as Bob being CEO and the oil's been, the oil was still flowing at this point in time, I apologize. This is his first interview he's going to do in the U.S., and no one wanted him to do it, but they figured, well, if you do it on NPR, at least you'll get a little bit of a fair shake. So we partnered with YouTube and we partnered with Google, and we simulcast it live on the Facebook page. So, and we told all of our fans on Facebook, and we were tweeting about it that, you know, obviously you could watch it on NPR, but you could also watch it live on the Facebook page. And what we were advertising about it was that while it was happening, while the interview was going on, we were in the room with like Kent Wells, Doug Suttles. We had about 7 or 8 other key executives in the room. So while Bob was being interviewed, you on Facebook could ask us a follow-up question, like, you know, what did Bob mean by that? Or, you know, I've got another question. And the executives in the room would answer the questions, and we'd be typing it in and posting it on Facebook. So we took what was, I think, if I remember correctly, like a 21 or 22-minute interview, and we were in that room for another 3 hours carrying on that conversation. So we took this one sort of seminal moment of Bob's first interview since the spill's been going on and he's over CEO, and extended that for another 3 hours, and it became this evergreen content that was on there forever. People continued, even after we told everybody the executives were done, we're going away, the conversation went on and on and on. So it was just a steep level of engagement that we were able to do and really get people to talk about the deeper issues of what was going on, not just how much they hate BP and how much we weren't doing anything. So, you know, when you're dealing with live broadcast events, this is how social media can really extend the reach of that and give it greater legs. You know, at the time, these weren't as popular as they are now, so it is a little bit dated, but we started developing these infographics, you know, trying to give people the sense of how big of an operation it was, you know, how many feet of boom goes from Portland, Oregon to San Francisco. You can see it's like 3.2 million feet of boom deployed. So, you know, just trying to put an easy infographic that people could wrap their heads around. We started posting them on Facebook, and people started taking them and sharing them, you know, and it wasn't just, you know, consumers who were doing it. We had reporters. Again, you know, reporters have 2 jobs now. They've got to write their articles for the traditional paper, but then they've also got their blog they have to deal with. People were taking these assets and posting them around, and again, once those assets are tagged, that increases the third-party validation. It's that multimedia strategy helping with SEO. So the more you can give people, even if it's something as silly as an infographic widget, if you tag it properly and you allow people to share it, it goes a long way in helping with your strategy. And then finally, this is just a picture of the war room to show you what I was talking about and what I try to get our clients to think about now. You know, over here to the right, you have the BP press officers. In the center, you have the social media team, my team, the advertising agency, and the BP.com team is down there. And you know, again, this crisis went on day in, day out. But the reason why these rooms work, and the reason why I suggest to our clients now that you need to have a rapid response team or a war room team, is the only way you're going to be able to handle a crisis in social media is if you have a plan in place. And the big thing that that plan needs to include is the legal department within any organization needs to be prepared to allow you guys to respond immediately. And they don't want to give you that control at all. They want to approve everything. So the workaround we had here, and it's a physical manifestation of it, but think about how you could do it in a virtual sense. BP knew that the press officers were the voice of the organization. So everything they were briefed on, they were allowed to say. They knew what we could talk about publicly, and they knew what we couldn't talk about publicly. So literally, my team would be sitting at that table writing content. We could lean over to the press officers, show them. They'd say, yes, no, change this, you can't post that, that's wrong, give us a thumbs up and go. There was no lawyers involved ever for the 98 days we were down there for the spill. So if you can set up something, and it's all prep work. I mean, it took us a week and a half to get to this point, so if you can do it ahead of time with your clients, you should. Figure out what that protocol is. Because social media, you got to respond like this. And if you got to be calling up the attorneys and they're going to be sitting on it for a day and a half, there's no point in responding to a crisis in social media. So have that approval protocol set up in place and determine internally at your client who is the person who can just say yes or no. And that person should be someone who's in a communications department because they understand the need for speed. They understand how to get it out quickly. So that is my story in a nutshell. I don't know if it was any value to you guys, but that's how I kind of see BP and issues management and crisis response all folding into larger communication strategies within organizations nowadays. It's no longer a group of people at different sides of the office working in silos. We've all got to be together, and we've all got to be working as one big team, and it doesn't matter where you sit as long as you know how to move quickly. Thanks. So if you guys have any questions or you want to challenge me on any of that, I got challenged this morning at breakfast. Someone grew up on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and was asking me a lot of pointed questions about how we talk to people, and I welcome that. I mean, it's great because we, you know, you may hate BP, and I totally get that, but I do, and I was not pleased to be down there in Houston that first week. I got to tell you, it wasn't like I was big fans of theirs, but I did become big fans of theirs because, number one, they really were sincerely upset about what they did, and they understood the magnitude of it. But number two, you know, they really did engage with people. They really didn't hide from the situation. I mean, they went out and engaged in social media, and they took their lumps, and they did what they needed to do. And if you take a look today, you know, the strategy was, and what they promised the American people is, we're not going to go away once the spill is over, because that's what everybody was afraid of. And they haven't gone away. They're still sinking tons of money into the affected communities in the Gulf of Mexico. The only place that you can see proof of that on a daily basis is within social media. If you go to the Facebook page today, and it's still my old team at my old agency, they're talking about, you know, spring break specials on the Gulf Coast, or they're talking about the seafood festival in Louisiana. They're you know, advertising everything that's going on down there and driving traffic down there. And you know, if you think about a reputation management campaign, besides ads, the only place you're going to see it is what you're posting in social media, and that's what BP's strategy is they're constantly letting everybody know what's going on in the Gulf so that they can help the Gulf, but also rebuild their reputation and live on that promise that we're not going to go anywhere. Any questions? No pointed questions? Yeah.
Now that all the content we're like people personally that's doing it, or where they post on their page now that
Now,
it's not crisis management?
BP?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, they're taking an interesting strategy, which which I disagree with, but so be it. They've kept their sites separate, right? They still have the BP America Facebook page, and then they have the BP Everywhere Else page, right? And a lot of that's obviously because of the spill. They don't want to taint the rest of the company with the spill globally if they don't have to. But the content that's going up now on the BP America page is really all about either what BP is doing to help the Gulf Coast, or essentially advertising good things that are going on the Gulf Coast right now to advertise, specials and things like that, and just continue to drive traffic in. So the content's really become very marketing heavy and very look at the wonder of BP heavy. The reason I disagree with the strategy is because you can't have 100 Facebook pages, right? Maybe you can have 2 if your company is relevant. But I mean, in a case like BP, my opinion is you need to have your Facebook page, and then you segment the audience properly. Now, you can have local pages if necessary, like, they do a lot of work in small countries where they have 10,000 employees. Maybe you want to have that. But when you're talking about the BP Facebook page and where people should go to find out what BP is doing, there should be one page, not the BP America page and the BP Everywhere Else page. Yes?
Did y'all have like a social media analytics team that kind of saw what content was going up or what content people like to see?
Yeah, we did. We had a team in New York and DC that was analyzing it, and we were using Nielsen Buzz Metrics. I wouldn't have used it, but we had to because BP was already using it for a lot of other things. The problem was that by the time we'd get the analysis, it was too late. When you're dealing in a crisis, it's rapid fire. You just got to go, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, just move on. But hindsight being 2020, the post reports were great when we started looking at what was happening, because you could see the trends of what resonated with people and what didn't, and those trends that the analysts gave us formulated what we were going to do moving forward post-spill. Once September rolled around and it kind of really died down, we were able to sit down and look at what was resonating and then build content strategies around that. I mean, some of it we had to throw away because it was crisis relevant, but you could see what was making people engage with us more, and we started building content around that. So it is important to have that. It's crucial to have that. It's just hard during a crisis. Anybody else? Yeah, sorry.
You talked about the importance of the war room in Houston centralization, and yet you said that the monitoring, the 24/7 monitoring of social media rotated around the U.S. and around the world. So I was interested in why there was the rotation rather than centralization.
There were a couple reasons. One, we just couldn't have that many people. I mean, we couldn't get that many people in Houston. Well, I guess we could have if we really wanted to. Not that many people wanted to come to Houston, let's put it that way. They wanted to stay in their offices. We had to follow the globe. It had to be 24/7, so we would follow the globe that way. And those people in those 4-hour shifts were given complete control. I mean, we gave them full guidelines and full control over what could be taken down and what couldn't be taken down. So we just felt like if we could have this rotating shift of people as it went around the globe, it would be a little bit more flexible for us and we wouldn't burn anybody out. I mean, the 4-person team that sat in Houston with me, I mean, I was the only one who, like I said, I only went home 8 times for those 6 months. Even that 4-person team, I mean, those poor people were burning out and dying. So it was how do we, again, and there are so few crises like this, but how do you keep up that level of diligence? I mean, this is all stuff that right now is discoverable in the lawsuits that are going on to this day. And everything we took down, we had to back up. You couldn't. Facebook archived everything that we left up for the attorneys. We had to archive everything we took down. So if you just had people who were burning out and miserable, it wasn't going to work. And we tried to keep people fresh by rotating that way. And there was, quite frankly, and I deal with it a lot in crises. You know, people just have moral objections to doing certain things, and a lot of people wouldn't work on the BP spill, and I get that. You know, I'm not going to force anybody to do anything they don't want to do. And even those who are willing to work on it, they're just like, you know, my life's not worth sacrificing a summer living in Houston. I'm going to stay here, and, you know, worked out for the best. Sure. I got two back there.
Can you talk a little bit more about the interaction with functions like legal and government affairs? It becomes such a roadblock so often, and it sounds like it wasn't in this case. And how do you think that was accomplished in the corporate structure?
Well, you know, for the most part, the government affairs communication was shut down during the crisis and handled by the attorneys, because it was literally the Obama administration and, you know, the White House calling up and saying, we're going to bankrupt you guys, and we're going to take over your assets, and we're going to destroy you. And then, so it wasn't usual relations with the government. It was very, very high level. So that changed quickly. But the, you know, with the attorneys, I'll be honest with you, and BP did it. It was advice from all of the agencies, but we weren't in the meetings or the decision-making process. The attorneys were gone during the crisis. They left us alone. We had briefings every morning with the UK and with everybody in Houston. We talked about what we were doing. We talked about what could and couldn't be talked about publicly. And then the press officers in Houston made the final decision, regardless of who was doing it. The attorneys really only showed up once the spill was over, and started, you know, taking all of our documents and making sure we were backing everything up and not taking pictures of anything. Yeah, so it was, and we never would have been as successful as we were if the attorneys were there. So I don't know what they did, but they did something right and got the attorneys out of the way. Back there.
Yeah, I want to challenge you on the impact of social media in the case of oil spill, because typically, or traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, the demographics for social media, for Facebook, is generally like 18 to 30, and so I'm thinking 18-year-old students aren't going to be real interested in oil spills as much as, you know, celebrity events or, you know, exciting events. So I'm just curious, because traditional media still has a role, and I'm thinking that people who are 40, 50, who might be more interested in something like this, what happens to traditional media like newspapers, television? You're saying that social media was so impactful in this instance, in this particular crisis,
Right.
but what happened to, I mean, what was the role of newspapers of traditional media? That's my question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, they you know, the traditional media reported the stories that were going on from the information that was being broken to them by the Obama administration or BP. I'll be real honest with you. I always knew it was true that the media was biased and slanted both ways, right? I never realized how much till I was at the belly of the beast and I, you know, knew the actual facts and watched what was being reported. It was really, really disheartening and disappointing. So take that for what it's worth with traditional media, but they played a big role in getting the story out there. I'm not saying they didn't. The thing that social media was so impactful with was that, you know, had this been 10 years ago, you know, that spill would have gone on and everybody would have been saying, I can't talk to BP. How do I get in touch with BP? I'm gonna write a letter, and that letter goes nowhere. What social media did was give people a voice and a presence and a place where they could come together as a community and, you know, yell at BP or ask for help for BP or just find out more information on a regular basis. And whether they believed what we were saying or not, any more or less than what the media was saying, that's up to them. The audience base, you know, I honestly didn't do any demographic or psychographic polls, but just based upon, you know, ad hoc anecdotal stuff, it was across the spectrum, because we had, you know, people all over the Gulf states talking to us, you know, from shrimp boat captains to hotel owners. So that's outside the usual social media demographic. But the younger audience were the ones who were the most upset with us. You know, I mean, that's when when you're young and you're passionate about stuff and you see something as horrible as what BP was doing to the Gulf of Mexico, you know, particularly because they were on Facebook already, they came out, the younger audience came out in droves and handed it to us. I mean, I at the time had a, my daughters were 12 and 10 at the time, and they were not happy with me and doing what I was doing. They wouldn't tell their friends what I was doing. The couple times I made it home and we'd go to the swim club, they told me not to talk about it with anybody. So, you know, and they weren't on Facebook at the time, but even at that age, and especially with the generations now, and they were mad, and we definitely got some stuff handed to us by them. But, you know, that's what it was for. That's why it was there. And if nothing else, it gave people an outlet to communicate with us.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, so the bottom line is you really have no way of knowing the actual demographics, like the age range of the folks who are engaging on Twitter and Facebook. You don't know the age range.
Not unless, well, you know, there are ways to do it now, and I'm working with a company in Virginia called MicroStrategy. They're a business intelligence company. And they have this amazing application called Wisdom. And Facebook knows about it, they work with Facebook on it. And it's a back-end tool that allows you to get that information that you're talking about, the age, you know, whatever the person's willing to give you, because it's all there in their info. But by Facebook's terms of service, I as a brand can't find that out unless it's offered to me. What MicroStrategy has developed is this great application that through a series of what they call tokens, and the consumer's incentivized to give these tokens. So if I'm on the BP page and I give up all these tokens, you know, I can tell you how old I am, you know, where I live, what my demographic is, and the stuff that we've been able to pull so far. I mean, it's actually kind of frightening. Like you can see who shops more at Target than at Walmart based upon their posts or the things that they offer up. So you can get it, but that really is a bit of that right now undetermined holy grail of Facebook, and these people are sitting on tons and tons and tons of great data. How do you get to it, and how do you really know what's going on? So
Stephen, we've got about 4 minutes to go.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Break for the change of classes.
Sure.
So anyway, other questions, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about how are you going to get people to enter into this data, and your experience with BP. How did this change how you operationalize social media and digital teams, like within a big company? How did it change your personal point of view?
I mean, it really did change it in the sense that it's no longer the shiny object that everybody thinks is cool and wants to play with and thinks it's fun. It's actually, to the first part of your question, it's the living data set, right? So it's at the center of everything you want to do in marketing or communications. And if you can build out a really strong social media strategy that runs across all of your consumer base, right? And start getting people to give you the information, you can analyze that data and turn it around, and informs everything else you're doing.
How do you do that? Being such a split up company, you're talking about you have hundreds of locations.
You know, it's just at this point in time, it's a slow process, but you're starting to see the people in the C-suite get that. You know, they're starting to realize that the data is at their fingertips and they just don't know what to do with it. And I think the people who are going to be running marketing in the next couple of years, like if I could go back and get my graduate degree again, I'd go back to get my librarian degree, because I'd want to be a chief information officer and not a chief marketing officer, because the guys who sit on the information control the world and control marketing. So that's what I would do. It's me.
Just real fast, and I know we're about to run out of time. The students that we have in our classes are concerned about social issues, are concerned about ethics and morality.
Sure.
Anyone who's worked in the business at some point seems to have an issue where they're trying to represent their clients as best as they could, and yet there seems to be some overarching kinds of moral, ethical issues that you deal with as you're working, the ones that your daughters expressed, for example. Do you have any advice for the students in terms of how you cope with the fact that you know that 7 to 10 miles from the spill, the coral reefs, the shrimps don't have eyes, the mutants are there, that this is, BP's been called a serial environmental criminal,
Yeah,
and you're representing them.
yeah, yeah.
Help the guys here who are gonna work for BP during the next 20 years cope with that kind of dilemma.
Yeah, it's you know, it's got to be your personal moral set and what's in you. And you know, I know where my personal line is and where I'll draw it. The thing for me with BP was, and I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, and they really need to improve a lot of things they're doing. But you know, at the same time too, I drive to work every day and I get in a plane and fly down here. So it's kind of hard for me. You know, like I make BP happen in many respects. So, and that's my personal thing. I'm not speaking for the room. So that's what you have to do. You got to find what's right for you and what isn't. And I had very good friends, still a very good friend of this day. She came to me and she's just like, and she was my right hand partner, and she's like, I'm not touching it. I'm not going anywhere near it. And you got to respect that. And if you're with an agency that forces you to do something you don't want to do, get out right away. It's just not worth it. You know, that's the big thing.
Well, maybe that's a good point to end on, Neil. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.